The dust kicked up from Samuel Harrison's worn boots as he stumbled through the main street of Copper Ridge. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, telling the story of too many missed meals and sleepless nights. The bank notice crumpled in his pocket felt heavier than the rocks he'd been hauling from his failing wheat fields all morning. Samuel had come west 3 years ago with dreams bigger than the Montana sky. He'd bought 160 acres of what the land agent promised was fertile ground, perfect for wheat farming. What the man hadn't mentioned was how the drought would come in the second year, turning his golden fields into patches of cracked earth that mocked his every effort. Now, with harvest season ending and his grain silos nearly empty, Samuel faced a truth harder than winter frost. The bank wanted their money in 30 days, or they'd take his land. Every cent he'd saved, every dollar borrowed from his brother back in Ohio, all of it had gone into seed that never sprouted and equipment that sat idle in fields too dry to plow. The saloon doors swung open as Samuel passed, releasing the sound of laughter and the smell of whiskey into the dusty street. Inside, men who'd struck silver in the nearby mines celebrated their good fortune, while Samuel counted the few coins in his pocket. He had enough for maybe one meal if he chose carefully. That's when he saw her. The Apache woman stood near the general store, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. She wore traditional buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the afternoon sun. Her long black hair was braided with small silver ornaments that chimed softly when she moved. But it was her eyes that stopped Samuel in his tracks, dark and knowing, as if she could see straight through to a person's soul. She was talking to the store owner, Tom Bradley, in perfect English that carried just a hint of her native accent. Samuel couldn't help but listen as she negotiated the price of supplies with a confidence that impressed him. Bradley, known throughout Copper Ridge for driving hard bargains, seemed almost eager to give her favorable terms. "The sacred mountain speaks of changes coming to this valley," she said, her voice carrying across the dusty space between them. "Those who listen will prosper. Those who ignore the signs will find only hardship." Bradley nodded nervously, wrapping her purchases in brown paper. "Yes, ma'am. Apachira. Your grandfather's wisdom has never steered us wrong before." Samuel realized he was staring and looked away, but not before the woman's eyes met his. For a moment that stretched longer than it should have. They regarded each other across the street. Samuel felt something stir in his chest. Not attraction exactly, though she was beautiful, but recognition, as if they'd been waiting to meet without knowing it. The woman finished her business and walked directly toward him. Samuel's first instinct was to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Up close he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes and the strength in her bearing. This was not a woman who asked permission from the world. "You are the farmer with the failing crops," she said. It wasn't a question. Samuel's face burned with embarrassment. "I suppose everyone in town knows about my troubles." "The land knows," she replied simply. "And the land tells me things." She studied his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Your heart is good, but your methods are wrong. You fight the earth instead of working with it." "I don't understand." "My name is Apachira. I am the granddaughter of Chief Running Wolf and daughter of the medicine woman White Dove. My family has lived in this valley for 7 generations before the white settlers came." She paused, her eyes never leaving his. "The spirits have shown me your face in dreams for 3 moons now." Samuel's mouth went dry. Dreams? Visions of a man who would learn the old ways of farming, who would respect the land instead of trying to conquer it. A man who would help bridge the gap between our peoples. Apachira reached into a small leather pouch at her waist and pulled out a handful of seeds unlike any Samuel had ever seen. They were dark and glistening, almost black, with tiny silver markings. Sacred corn, she explained, grown by my ancestors for 1,000 years. It needs little water and grows strong in difficult soil, but it requires patience and respect. Samuel stared at the seeds. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Apachira's expression grew serious. Because the spirits have chosen you for something greater than farming. They have shown me that you will be the father of children who will unite our peoples in ways that have never been possible before. She met his startled gaze steadily. I name you as the one to bear my future child. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his mind reeling. Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake. We just met, and I can't even feed myself, let alone— There is no mistake, Apachira said firmly. The mountain spirits are never wrong. You may not understand now, but you will. She pressed the seeds into his palm, her fingers warm against his skin. Plant these with the new moon. Speak to them as you would to children. Water them with respect, not desperation. They will grow. Samuel looked down at the seeds, then back at her. And if they don't, they will. But more than that, you will learn to see this land as it truly is, not as you wish it to be. Only then will you be ready for what the spirits have planned. Apachira turned to leave, then looked back over her shoulder. My lodge is in the canyon beyond the red rocks. When you understand what I have told you, come find me. With that, she walked away, her moccasins making no sound on the hard-packed earth. Samuel watched until she disappeared around the corner, then looked down at the seeds in his hand. They seemed to pulse with their own inner warmth. The banknotice crumpled in his pocket reminded him of his immediate problems, but something had shifted in the last few minutes. For the first time in months, Samuel felt something other than despair. Whether it was hope or merely curiosity, he couldn't say, but it was enough to make him want to see what would happen if he planted these strange seeds. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains red and gold, Samuel prepared a small section of his best remaining soil. The seeds went into the ground just as Apachira had instructed, planted with care instead of the desperate urgency he'd shown his previous crops. As he covered the last seed with earth, Samuel found himself speaking to them as if they were indeed children. He told them about his dreams for the land, his fears about losing everything, and his confusion about the strange Apache woman who claimed the spirits had chosen him for something he didn't understand. The stars came out bright and clear that night, and Samuel lay in his small cabin, listening to the wind whisper through the valley. Somewhere out there, beyond the red rocks, Apachira waited in her lodge. The thought should have terrified him, but instead it filled him with a peculiar sense of anticipation. Change was coming to Copper Ridge. Samuel could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm. Whether it would destroy him or save him remained to be seen, but for the first time since coming west, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 days passed before the first green shoots appeared in the patch where Samuel had planted Apachira's sacred corn. He knelt in the dirt, hardly believing his eyes. In 3 years of farming this land, he'd never seen anything grow so quickly or look so healthy. The plants seemed to thrive in conditions that had killed everything else he'd tried to grow. While his wheat fields remained barren, the sacred corn reached toward the sky with a vitality that defied explanation. Samuel found himself visiting the patch several times a day, talking to the plants as Apachira had suggested. You're stronger than you look, he told them one morning as he carefully watered each plant by hand, just like her. News of Samuel's mysteriously successful crop spread quickly through Copper Ridge. Neighbors who had written him off as another failed homesteader began stopping by to see the thriving corn with their own eyes. Tom Bradley mentioned it to everyone who came into his store, and soon Samuel had a steady stream of visitors. "What kind of seed is that?" asked Martha Collins, whose own garden had struggled all summer. "I've never seen anything like it." Samuel found himself reluctant to mention Apachira's involvement. The people of Copper Ridge tolerated the local Apache tribes, but there was an undercurrent of suspicion and misunderstanding that made him cautious about revealing the source of his success. "Special variety from back east," he said instead, hating himself for the lie even as he spoke it. But the lie ate at him as the corn continued to flourish. By the end of the first week, the plants stood knee-high and showed no signs of slowing down. Samuel's failing farm suddenly looked like it might produce a crop after all, and the bank notice in his pocket felt a little less threatening. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about Apachira's words. The idea that he was chosen for something beyond farming seemed impossible, but the evidence growing in his field suggested that impossible things might be more common than he'd thought. On the night of the full moon, exactly 2 weeks after their first meeting, Samuel made a decision that would change his life forever. He saddled his horse and rode toward the red rocks, following directions Apachira had given him without really intending to remember them. The canyon beyond the rocks was bathed in silver moonlight that made the landscape look otherworldly. Samuel followed a narrow path that wound between towering stone walls until it opened into a circular valley hidden from the outside world. Apachira's lodge sat in the center of the valley, smoke rising from the fire pit beside it. She emerged as he approached, dressed in ceremonial clothing that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her feet were bare despite the cool night air. "I wondered if you would come," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the still air. Samuel dismounted and walked toward her, his heart pounding harder with each step. "Your seeds are growing." "Of course they are." Apachira smiled, and Samuel realized it was the first time he'd seen her look anything other than serious. "Did you speak to them as I suggested?" "I did. I felt foolish at first, but—" Samuel shrugged. "They seemed to like it. Plants respond to intention and respect, just like people." Apachira gestured for him to sit by the fire. "The corn will feed your body. What I offer now will feed your spirit." Samuel settled onto a buffalo robe beside the fire, acutely aware of how close they were sitting. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being chosen for something. And what do you think? I think you're either the wisest woman I've ever met, or the most beautiful one who's ever lost her mind." Samuel immediately regretted the words, but Apachira laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Perhaps I am both," she said. "Would that frighten you?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "A week ago it would have. Now, I don't know what frightens me anymore." Apachira reached out and touched his hand, her fingers tracing the calluses left by years of farm work. "You have good hands. Strong hands. They will raise strong children." The directness of her statement made Samuel's breath catch. "Apachira, I need to understand something. When you say the spirits have chosen me, what exactly does that mean?" She was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "My people have lived in this valley since the world was young. We have seen many changes, the coming of horses, the arrival of white settlers, the building of towns and railroads. Some changes bring growth, others bring destruction." Samuel nodded, encouraging her to continue. "The spirits have shown me a vision of the future, a time when the children of two worlds will need to understand both if they are to survive. Your people know how to build and organize, but you have forgotten how to listen to the land. My people know the old wisdom, but we struggle to adapt to the new ways." Apachira's grip on his hand tightened. "Our children will bridge that gap." "Our children," Samuel repeated quietly, "if you choose to accept what the spirits offer." Apachira's voice grew softer. "I will not force myself on any man, no matter what the visions show. The choice must be yours freely made." Samuel stared into the fire, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was proposing. Marriage to an Apache woman would make him an outcast in most white settlements. Their children would face prejudice from both communities. And yet, sitting here in this hidden valley with this remarkable woman, the idea felt less insane than it should have. "How long have you known?" he asked. "The dream started when the leaves began to turn. At first I saw only shadows and uncertain shapes, but each night the vision became clearer until I could see your face, hear your voice." Apachira released his hand and reached for a small leather bag beside her. "I have something that belongs to you." She opened the bag and withdrew a piece of turquoise carved in the shape of a wolf. Even in the firelight, Samuel could see the intricate details of the carving, every line of fur, every curve of muscle rendered with incredible skill. "This was carved by my grandfather before he died. He said it would know its owner when the time came." Apachira held the wolf out to Samuel. "It grew warm in my hands the day I first saw you." Samuel took the carving and immediately felt a strange sensation, as if something inside him recognized the smooth stone. The wolf seemed to pulse with the same inner warmth as the sacred corn seeds. "I don't understand any of this," he said finally. "Understanding will come with time. For now, you need only decide if you trust me enough to try." Apachira's eyes searched his face. "I am offering you more than marriage, Samuel Harrison. I am offering you a destiny that will change both our peoples for the better." The fire crackled between them as Samuel weighed her words. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a failed farmer facing bankruptcy and defeat. Tonight, he sat with an Apache medicine woman who spoke of spirits and destinies and children who would unite two worlds. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was madness, but his heart, which had been silent for so long, whispered that this might be the most sane thing he'd ever considered. Samuel looked down at the wolf carving in his palm, then back at Apachira's patient, waiting face. The sacred corn growing in his field proved she possessed knowledge beyond anything he understood. Her presence filled the empty spaces in his life he hadn't even known were there. "If I say yes," he said slowly, "what happens next?" Apachira's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Next, we begin the work of building a bridge between two worlds, starting with learning to truly know each other." The moon continued its journey across the star-filled sky as Samuel and Apachira talked through the night, sharing stories of their different childhoods, their hopes, their fears. And somewhere in the sacred valley, hidden from the judgment of both their peoples, the foundation of something extraordinary began to take root. The sacred corn stood 8 feet tall when the first frost warnings came to Copper Ridge. Samuel walked through his transformed fields in the early morning light, hardly believing the abundance surrounding him. Where other farms showed the brown stubble of failed crops, his land displayed row after row of healthy plants heavy with grain. Word of Samuel's miraculous harvest had spread beyond Copper Ridge to neighboring settlements. Farmers came from as far as Helena to see the impossible crop growing in soil that had defeated every previous attempt at agriculture. They offered gold coins for seeds, promising fortunes if Samuel would share his secret. He turned them all away. The refusals earned him a reputation for selfishness that troubled Samuel deeply, but he couldn't betray Apachira's trust. The sacred corn belonged to her people, and only she could decide who else might be worthy to receive it. Samuel's daily routine had changed completely over the past month. Each morning before dawn, he rode to the hidden valley beyond the red rocks where Apachira waited with lessons that had nothing to do with farming and everything to do with seeing the world through different eyes. She taught him to read the language of wind and weather, to understand the messages carried in bird flight patterns and the color of clouds. Under her guidance, Samuel learned that successful farming meant becoming part of the land's natural rhythms instead of imposing his will upon it. "The earth is alive," Apachira explained as they walked through a grove of aspens whose leaves shimmered gold in the autumn air. Your people treat it like a thing to be used up and discarded. That is why your crops fail. But your corn grows in my fields using the same soil, Samuel pointed out. Because you learned to ask instead of demand. Apachira knelt beside a stream and cupped the clear water in her hands. When you speak to the plants with respect, they choose to help you. When you fight them, they resist. Samuel found these lessons both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Everything he'd learned about farming back in Ohio had emphasized control, controlling weeds, controlling pests, controlling every aspect of the growing process. Apachira's approach required him to surrender that control and trust in forces he couldn't see or measure. But the results spoke for themselves. The sacred corn continued to thrive even as temperatures dropped and other crops withered. More importantly, Samuel found himself changing in ways that had nothing to do with agriculture. The constant worry that had plagued him since coming west began to ease. The knot of anxiety in his chest loosened as he learned to trust in something larger than his own limited understanding. For the first time in years, Samuel slept through the night without waking to worry about money or failure or the uncertain future. The people of Copper Ridge noticed the change in him. Martha Collins mentioned that Samuel seemed years younger, while Tom Bradley observed that the perpetual tension had disappeared from his face. Even Pastor Williams commented that Samuel appeared to have found peace with his circumstances. What they didn't know was that Samuel had found much more than peace. He had found love. It happened gradually, without fanfare or dramatic declarations. One evening, as they sat by her fire, sharing a simple meal of corn cakes and wild berries, Samuel looked across at Apachira and realized his heart had made its choice without consulting his head. She was teaching him phrases in her native language, her voice soft and musical as she corrected his pronunciation. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the strength in her profile and the gentle humor in her dark eyes. Samuel found himself memorizing every detail. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, the graceful movements of her hands as she spoke, the quiet confidence that surrounded her like an invisible cloak. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noticing his distraction. "That I understand now why the spirits chose me," Samuel said quietly. "Not because I'm special, but because I was empty enough to be filled with something better than what I was before." Apachira's eyes softened. "You were never empty. You were simply looking in the wrong direction." That night, Samuel asked the question he'd been carrying for weeks. "When will we marry?" "When you're ready to face what marriage to me will cost you," Apachira replied without hesitation. "Are you prepared to be seen as a traitor by your own people? Can you accept that our children will be called half-breeds and worse? Will you stand with me when the church refuses to recognize our union and the law treats our family as lesser?" The questions hit Samuel like cold water. In the peaceful bubble of their hidden valley, he'd allowed himself to forget the harsh realities awaiting them in the outside world. White men who married Indian women were considered outcasts at best, criminals at worst. Their children would face a lifetime of prejudice from both communities. "I won't pretend it will be easy," he said finally. "But the alternative is living without you, and that's not living at all." Apachira studied his face in the firelight. "The spirits showed me your answer before you spoke it, but you needed to choose for yourself, with full knowledge of what that choice means." She reached into her medicine pouch and withdrew 2 items, a silver ring set with turquoise and a small bundle of sage tied with leather cord. "This ring belonged to my grandmother, given to her by the Spanish trader she married against her family's wishes. Their love endured every hardship because they chose each other with eyes wide open." Samuel took the ring, feeling its weight both physical and spiritual. "What about the sage?" for cleansing ourselves of old fears before we begin our new life together." Apachira's voice grew formal, ceremonial. "Will you take me as your wife according to the laws of both our peoples?" "I will," Samuel said, sliding the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly. They burned the sage together, letting the sweet smoke carry their old lives into the star-filled sky. Then, with only the moon and mountain spirits as witnesses, they spoke the vows that would bind their lives together. The ceremony was simple but profound. Apachira sang ancient words in her native tongue while Samuel recited promises in English. They exchanged gifts. He gave her the deed to his farm, making her an equal partner in everything he owned, while she presented him with a war bonnet that had belonged to her grandfather, a symbol of adoption into her clan. When morning came, they were husband and wife by Apache law. Making it legal in the eyes of white society would prove far more complicated. Samuel's first challenge came when he tried to register their marriage in Copper Ridge. County Clerk Henderson, a thin man with nervous eyes and sweating palms, read through the Apache marriage documents 3 times before shaking his head. "I can't file these," Henderson said, pushing the papers back across his desk. "Indian ceremonies don't count as legal marriages under territorial law." "Then what would make it legal?" Samuel asked, working to keep his voice level. "Well," Henderson fidgeted with his pen, "you'd need a Christian ceremony performed by a recognized minister." "But I don't know any preacher who'd agree to marry a white man to a squaw." Samuel's hand tightened on his hat brim, but he managed not to react to the slur. "What if we found one who would?" Henderson shrugged. "Then I'd have to file it, I suppose. But good luck with that." Samuel spent the next 2 days visiting every church in Copper Ridge and the surrounding area. The responses ranged from polite refusal to outright hostility, but the result was always the same. No minister would perform a marriage ceremony between a white man and an Apache woman. Pastor Williams, who had always been kind to Samuel, at least explained his position honestly. "I don't have anything personal against your woman, Samuel. By all accounts, she's intelligent and well-spoken, but mixing the races goes against biblical teaching, and I can't in good conscience perform such a ceremony." "What if you're wrong about the biblical teaching?" Samuel asked. "What if God brought us together for a purpose you don't understand?" Pastor Williams sighed heavily. "Then I'll answer for my mistake when I stand before the Lord. But I have to follow my conscience as I understand it." Samuel left the church feeling defeated, but not surprised. He'd known this wouldn't be easy, but the reality of their situation was sinking in. In the eyes of the law, he and Apachira were not married. Their children would be considered illegitimate. Any property they shared could be contested by his family back in Ohio. But when Samuel returned to the hidden valley and found Apachira tending a cook fire, her presence reminded him why none of those legal complications mattered. They were married in every way that counted, in their hearts, in her people's traditions, and in the sight of whatever divine power had brought them together. "No luck?" she asked, reading his expression. "None. But I have another idea." Samuel sat beside her and took her hands in his. "What if we don't need their approval? What if we build our own community here with its own rules and customs?" Apachira's eyes grew thoughtful. "Tell me what you're thinking." "The sacred corn is going to make us wealthy. Farmers will pay anything for seeds that can grow in difficult conditions. We could buy more land, invite other families who want to live differently. Mixed couples, progressive thinkers, anyone looking for a place where they can be accepted as they are." The idea took shape as Samuel spoke, becoming more compelling with each detail. They could establish a settlement where Apache wisdom and white innovation worked together, where children learned both traditions and grew up seeing diversity as strength rather than weakness. "It would be dangerous," Apachira pointed out. "Both our peoples have those who would see such a place as a threat." "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," Samuel replied. "But our children will need somewhere to belong, and if that place doesn't exist, we'll have to create it." Over the following weeks, Samuel and Apachira began laying the groundwork for their ambitious dream. They used the profits from the sacred corn harvest to purchase additional land, vast tracts that other settlers had given up on due to poor soil and water problems. But what others saw as worthless, Apachira recognized as potential. Using techniques passed down through generations of her people, she showed Samuel how to read the hidden signs that indicated underground springs and fertile patches hidden beneath seemingly barren surfaces. They discovered 3 separate water sources on their expanded property, along with rich soil that previous owners had simply been farming incorrectly. With proper treatment using Apache methods, the land could support crops, livestock, and eventually a substantial community. The first families began arriving in early winter. Word of Samuel and Apachira's successful partnership had spread through networks both communities preferred to keep secret. The Underground Railroad of mixed marriages and progressive thinkers who dreamed of a different kind of life in the American West. Marcus and Sarah Chen came first, a Chinese immigrant and Irish woman whose marriage had made them outcasts in San Francisco. They brought expertise in mining and engineering that would prove invaluable for developing the settlement's infrastructure. Next came the Reverend Joshua Black and his Lakota wife, Running Deer. Joshua had been defrocked by his denomination for marrying outside his race, but he brought both literacy and a progressive interpretation of Christianity that could coexist with Native American spiritual traditions. The Jenkins family arrived just before the first major snowfall. A freed slave named Tobias, his wife Clara, and their 3 children who'd been driven out of their previous settlement by racial violence. Tobias brought skills in metalworking and tool-making that the growing community desperately needed. As winter settled over their hidden valley, Samuel found himself managing a small but growing settlement of 12 families, each with their own reasons for seeking refuge from the conventional world. The challenges were enormous: providing shelter, organizing food distribution, establishing governance structures that honored everyone's traditions. But the rewards were even greater. For the first time since coming west, Samuel felt like he was building something that would last, something worthy of the extraordinary woman who had chosen to share his destiny. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside their expanded lodge, Apachira placed Samuel's hand on her still flat belly and smiled. "The first bridge between our worlds grows here," she whispered. Samuel pulled her close, marveling at how completely his life had changed since that dusty day when a struggling farmer had met an Apache visionary on the main street of Copper Ridge. The child she carried would be born into a community that celebrated rather than merely tolerated diversity, where ancient wisdom and new ideas combined to create possibilities neither culture could achieve alone. The spirits had indeed chosen well, Samuel thought, as he listened to the wind sing through the valley that was becoming home to something unprecedented in the American West. Their love had grown into something much larger than marriage. It had become the foundation for a new way of living that could offer hope to anyone brave enough to embrace a different kind of future. But Samuel knew their greatest challenges still lay ahead. Building a successful community was one thing. Protecting it from those who would see it destroyed was quite another. As he held his pregnant wife in his arms, Samuel whispered a prayer to whatever powers watched over them that their bridge between worlds would prove strong enough to weather the storms he could already see gathering on the horizon. Spring brought both new life and unexpected danger to the valley settlement Samuel and Apachira had named Harmony Ridge. Their son had been born during the worst blizzard of winter, arriving as if he intended to prove his strength from the very beginning. They named him Joseph Running Wolf Harrison, honoring both his grandfather's legacy and his father's heritage. The baby's arrival had been celebrated by the entire community. Reverend Black performed a naming ceremony that blended Christian baptism with Apache traditions, while the other families contributed handmade gifts and promises of protection for the child who represented their collective hopes for the future. But as the snow melted and mountain passes reopened, the outside world began to take notice of what they'd built in their hidden valley. The first sign of trouble came when Tom Bradley made an unexpected visit to Samuel's original farm, now managed by Tobias Jenkins as part of their cooperative agricultural system. "Folks in town are asking questions," Bradley warned, as they walked through fields green with the sacred corn that had become Harmony Ridge's main source of income. "Word's gotten out about your community up in the valley. Some people aren't happy about it." Samuel felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that lead to trouble," Bradley replied grimly. "Sheriff Morrison's been getting pressure from some of the bigger ranchers about your mixing of the races. They're claiming your settlement poses a threat to public order." Samuel knew the real concern had nothing to do with public order and everything to do with economics. The success of Harmony Ridge had demonstrated that cooperation between different cultures could be incredibly profitable. Their crops outproduced every traditional farm in the region, their mining operations yielded higher quality ore, and their innovative water management systems allowed them to thrive in conditions that defeated conventional settlers. Success bred resentment, especially when that success challenged deeply held beliefs about racial superiority. "What's Morrison planning to do?" Samuel asked. "Nothing yet, but he's under pressure. Judge Whitman's been talking about sending territorial inspectors to investigate whether your community is in compliance with federal laws regarding Indian settlements." Bradley's weathered face showed genuine concern. "Samuel, I've known you since you first came to Copper Ridge. You're a good man, and what you've built up there is remarkable. But you might want to consider whether it's worth the fight that's coming." Samuel thanked Bradley for the warning and rode hard back to Harmony Ridge, his mind racing with the implications. Federal involvement could destroy everything they'd worked to build. The government had a long history of breaking up Native American communities, and the mixed nature of their settlement would provide convenient justification for intervention. He found Apachira nursing their son outside their expanded lodge, her face serene in the afternoon sunlight. The sight of his wife and child surrounded by the thriving community they'd created filled Samuel with fierce protectiveness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't let anyone destroy what they'd built together. "We have problems," he said, settling beside her on the buffalo robe. Apachira listened without interruption as Samuel related Bradley's warning, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on the distant mountain peaks. "My grandfather once told me that bridges are built to be crossed, not to hide behind," she said finally. "Perhaps it's time we stopped hiding." "What do you mean?" "We've been so focused on creating our own world that we've forgotten about changing the one outside our valley." Apachira shifted the baby to her shoulder, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "What if we invited the territorial inspectors to come see what we've accomplished? What if we showed them that cooperation between peoples creates prosperity rather than problems?" Samuel considered her suggestion. It was risky, extremely risky. Opening their community to government scrutiny could result in immediate shutdown and forced relocation. But the alternative was living in constant fear, always looking over their shoulders for threats that would inevitably materialize anyway. "It could work," he said slowly, "but we'd need allies, people in positions of authority who could vouch for us." Over the next several weeks, Samuel and Apachira embarked on a carefully planned campaign to build support for their community. They began by inviting influential visitors to see Harmony Ridge for themselves, starting with newspaper editors and territorial officials who might be sympathetic to their cause. The first breakthrough came when Helena Daily Herald editor James Morrison agreed to visit and write a feature story about their agricultural innovations. Morrison arrived skeptical and left as an advocate, particularly impressed by their water conservation techniques and crop rotation methods. His article, titled "A New Model for Western Settlement," appeared on the front page and generated responses from across the territory. Agricultural scientists requested visits to study their farming methods, while progressive religious leaders praised their successful integration of different cultural traditions. But the most important visit came from an unexpected source. Sarah Henderson, wife of the territorial governor, arrived unannounced one morning with her teenage daughter in tow. She'd read Morrison's article and wanted to see the famous community where civilization advances through cooperation rather than conquest. Sarah proved to be exactly the ally they needed. As the daughter of a Methodist minister and wife of a politician, she had both moral authority and political connections. More importantly, she possessed the rare ability to see past racial prejudices to recognize the practical benefits of what Harmony Ridge had achieved. "This is extraordinary," she told Samuel and Apachira after touring their agricultural and mining operations. "You've created more prosperity in one valley than most territories achieve across thousands of square miles. Governor Henderson needs to see this for himself." The governor's visit was arranged for late summer, coinciding with harvest season when the community's achievements would be most visible. Samuel spent weeks preparing presentations that emphasized the economic benefits of their model while downplaying the racial integration that so alarmed their critics. Governor Henderson arrived with a small entourage that included Territorial Attorney General William Cross and Indian Agent Benjamin Stone. Samuel's heart sank when he recognized Stone. The man was notorious for his harsh treatment of Native American communities and his belief that assimilation required the complete abandonment of tribal customs. But Samuel had underestimated his wife's diplomatic skills. Apachira greeted the officials in perfect English, dressed in clothing that combined Native American beadwork with contemporary styles, representing both cultures without abandoning either. She presented their community not as a rejection of American values, but as their ultimate expression: freedom, opportunity, and the pursuit of happiness for all people, regardless of background. The tour was a masterpiece of strategic presentation. They began with the agricultural operations, where Tobias Jenkins demonstrated the superior yield of crops grown using combined techniques. The sacred corn stood 12 feet tall, heavy with grain that would feed families throughout the territory. Next came the mining operations, where Marcus Chen showed how Chinese engineering methods had tripled the productivity of the silver claims. The workshops displayed tools and crafts that combined Native American artistry with industrial efficiency, creating products that commanded premium prices in markets from Denver to San Francisco. But the most powerful moment came when they visited the school, where children of 6 different ethnic backgrounds learned together under the guidance of teachers who spoke 4 languages. The students demonstrated reading skills in both English and Apache, mathematical concepts that drew from Chinese and European traditions, and scientific knowledge that integrated Western learning with Native American ecological wisdom. "These children represent the future of the American West," Apachira told the officials as they watched young Joseph Harrison toddle between his mixed heritage playmates. "They carry the strengths of all our peoples while belonging fully to this land." Governor Henderson was clearly impressed, but Benjamin Stone remained skeptical. "This is all very impressive," he said during the evening feast the community held in honor of their visitors. "But what happens when conflicts arise between your different groups? What authority governs this settlement?" Samuel exchanged glances with Apachira before answering. They'd anticipated this question and prepared carefully for it. "We govern ourselves through a council that includes representatives from each family and cultural tradition," Samuel explained. Decisions are made through discussion and consensus, with disputes resolved by mediation rather than force. And if mediation fails? Attorney General Cross pressed. It hasn't yet, Apachira replied simply. When people have equal voice and equal stake in outcomes, they find ways to work together. The officials stayed 3 days, observing daily life and asking detailed questions about everything from land ownership to marriage customs. By the time they prepared to leave, even Benjamin Stone seemed grudgingly impressed by the community's stability and prosperity. Governor Henderson's report to Washington proved to be a turning point. Rather than recommending dissolution of the settlement, he praised Harmony Ridge as a model for peaceful and productive development of the American frontier. His endorsement carried enough weight to deflect the political pressure that had been building against them. The federal recognition that followed brought both opportunities and new responsibilities. Harmony Ridge was designated as an experimental settlement, with special status that protected them from interference while requiring regular reports on their progress. The designation attracted new families seeking refuge from prejudice and persecution. Former slaves, religious minorities, immigrants facing discrimination, all found welcome in the valley where diversity was valued rather than feared. The community grew to over 200 people, requiring new leadership structures and expanded infrastructure. Samuel found himself elected as the settlement's first official mayor, while Apachira was chosen to head the cultural council that preserved and shared the traditions of all their peoples. Together, they worked to maintain the delicate balance that made their community work, respecting differences while building unity, honoring the past while embracing change. Their success inspired similar settlements across the West. News of Harmony Ridge spread through networks of progressive thinkers and persecuted minorities, proving that alternatives to traditional frontier society were not only possible, but profitable. Letters arrived from California, Texas, and Oregon requesting advice on establishing similar communities. The sacred corn that had started it all became a symbol of their achievement. Seeds were carefully shared with other settlements, but always with the understanding that the crop's true magic lay not in its genetics, but in the respect and cooperation required to grow it successfully. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and red, Samuel reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, he'd been a failed farmer facing bankruptcy and despair. Now he governed a thriving community that challenged every assumption about what was possible in the American West. The changes went far beyond material success. Samuel had discovered aspects of himself he'd never known existed: leadership abilities, diplomatic skills, and a vision for the future that extended far beyond his own immediate needs. Apachira's influence had transformed not just his farming techniques, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be human in relationship with the land and with other people. Their son Joseph, now taking his first steps across the floor of their expanded home, would grow up in a world none of them could have imagined when Samuel first planted those sacred seeds. The boy would know multiple languages, understand diverse traditions, and see cooperation rather than conflict as the natural state of human relations. But perhaps the most profound change was in Samuel himself. The desperate, struggling farmer who had stumbled through Copper Ridge's dusty streets had been replaced by a man who understood that true wealth came not from conquering the land, but from learning to live in harmony with it and with all the people who shared it. On a crisp November evening, as the first snow began to fall on Harmony Ridge, Samuel stood outside their lodge watching Apachira teach a group of children to identify winter constellations. The sight filled him with contentment deeper than anything he'd experienced in his previous life. The Apache woman who had named him as the father of her children had given him far more than a family. She had given him a purpose worthy of the life they'd built together, and children who would carry their vision forward into a future bright with unprecedented possibilities. "Come inside," Apachira called softly, switching effortlessly between English and Apache as she always did. "The spirits are singing tonight, and we should listen." Samuel joined his wife and son by the fire, surrounded by the sounds of a community settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that different peoples could not only coexist, but thrive together. But tonight, as sacred songs drifted through the valley and stars emerged bright and clear in the winter sky, Samuel Harrison knew he was exactly where he belonged, in the heart of a family and community that embodied the best hopes of a nation, still learning what it meant to truly be free. The bridge between worlds that Apachira had envisioned was no longer just a dream. It had become a living reality, growing stronger with each passing season and each child born to carry its promise forward. And Samuel knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, as partners, as parents, and as proof that love could indeed conquer the divisions that had once seemed impossible to cross.